Hello, Amanda. Hello, Jeremy.
Hi.
Hi, Mark, and hello, Amy.
Hi.
I'm going to have you introduce yourselves, and I can get the conversation also rolling while we're waiting for Scott to hopefully join in on this one. But I do obviously want to point out we have a student ambassador who is joining us on this panel as well. So we will be going to Amy occasionally on this, but let's pop around, and Amanda, if you could start.
Sure thing. Thank you. So my name is Amanda Cupido. I am currently the Director of Talk and Talent at AM 640 Toronto, which is a chorus station. And so I'm overseeing the newsroom, the producers, and the board operators, and of course the hosts at that station. Previously, I launched a podcast production company called Lead Podcasting. And so that was creating branded and original podcasts, and that company is still going. I'm also the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, The Essential Guide to Doing It Right. And I've had the pleasure of teaching at both X University and Seneca College in their School of Journalism and teaching radio and podcasting. I have some previous experience in communications, and my roots are in radio, where I worked as a producer, an anchor, and a reporter. So lots to share, and I'm excited to get into it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mark, let's head over to you next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm Mark Legier, and I'm the Director of News Content for Acadia Broadcasting, which has 15 radio stations from Northern Ontario to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And I'm also the editor of a digital business news publication called Huddle, and Acadia Broadcasting owns Huddle, which is how I came into the job that I'm in now. I was actually the editor of Huddle, and then got offered the opportunity to take over both the news content role for Acadia Broadcasting as well. My roots are actually I studied at Ryerson to go into magazine journalism. And like a lot of journalists, and I'm sure this subject will come up as we go on this panel, I took many different turns in my career. I started out in newspapers, moved to CBC radio, then moved into digital media with a cannabis culture publication called Civilized. And I went from there to Huddle, and then now back to radio with Acadia Broadcasting. So I've kind of meandered, I like to say.
Sounds like everyone's moving around. I love this mix up of platforms and how we're using things. Jeremy, welcome.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm relatively new to radio. Simply put, this was a career change for me. I was a chef. I ran fine dining kitchens for about 25 years before I decided I needed something new. I needed a change, and I found that in radio broadcasting. I went to Humber College, where I did a double internship, one at Sirius XM for their Canada Talks channel 167, and also as a news intern for 96.9 Radio Humber. My first job out of the gate was at Global News Radio 640 Toronto, where I was hired as a part-time board op, but in my interview, it came to light that they needed a weekend news anchor, and I had a solution for them. And that's how I got to be my very first weekend news anchor gig. From that, I was presented an opportunity at Zoomer Media, where I am to this day, operating as the weekend news anchor, but I also anchor throughout the different day parts. I also am technical producer for Fight Back with Libby Znaimer, which is, of course, a current events talk show that is also turned into a podcast at the end of each episode. And that's been a nutshell.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Jeremy. Amy, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name's Amy Simon. I'm a second-year broadcast journalism student at Fanshawe College. On top of that, I'm also a reporter and the podcast host for Fanshawe Student Union paper called The Interrobang. And today I am your student ambassador for the News Talk and Podcasting section of the Career Day. And really, Gina said it in the beginning, but my job is to really help with questions and answer some too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. While we're waiting for Scott to get connected in, please throw some questions. We want to spend the time getting the answers that you want for this. And I know that there had been some questions in the previous panel a little bit related to how much maybe podcasting is becoming part of what's happening within even newsrooms and the sort of intersection of news and talk and podcast. And then also obviously that editorial component, but also objective news and all of this stuff coming together. But Amy, I'll start off with you in terms of how important is podcasting, or how do you get into that area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't speak as much as I know some of our other panelists will be able to today. I've only been in it for about 6 months, but yeah, it's been incredible. It's definitely different than regular reporting or interviews that I've done in the past, especially for getting news stories. It's more of a conversation. I personally love that. I love really diving into a subject with someone and getting to the root of what we're talking about, but also learning a little bit more about them in the process and who they are. And yeah, it's been a great experience. And I think it's really important in a sense of journalism and everything that we will be talking about early on today. I don't know if Amanda or Jeremy can add on to that. I don't have as much experience, but I'd love to hear more from them. So yeah.
Let's head over to Amanda on this. And it is a different way of being able to not be maybe in the time constraints necessarily, or how you have that conversation, and everything does intersect a little bit on this.
For sure. And Amy, don't downplay your 6 months. That's longer than a lot of people. So you are still helping to define the industry, which is evolving every day and every week. It's really an exciting time. I think there's a lot to consider with regard to the intersection of podcasting and radio. I think podcasting, at its heart, has a lot of similarities to radio. Audio as a whole is an intimate medium. People feel that they really are connected with hosts that they listen to in their ears, and it's really special. And so I think that for sure it is the foundation of it all, and why I think radio still exists and why podcasting is so popular. But we do see a lot of differences where each of the mediums can play to their strengths. So with radio, you have this live element where a caller can call in and change the course of a conversation or add some information that could never have been planned. And that live interaction can't really be emulated in the podcast form as we know it. So that's a superpower of radio, and this live, quick turnaround energy to it. Whereas podcasting, one of the brilliant elements of that is Gina was mentioning, there's no time constraints. I think with radio, we're always set to be out at a time and news at a time, and that's what makes radio great. People know what to expect when. But when I'm creating podcasts, I like to say, when people say, well, what's the best length of a podcast? No, there is no best length. It's what is the story and how long does it deserve? You tell me how long you think this episode should be, and every episode can be different. And so I think that really blows open a lot of possibilities for creativity. And so sometimes when we're looking at this intersection of radio and podcasting, I think a lot of radio folks take their formulaic knowledge of radio and apply it to podcasting. And sometimes it doesn't always land because it is a bit of a different beast. So it's a matter of taking the foundational pieces that do translate to both, but then honoring the specific medium that you're working in order for you to be able to reap the benefits of the two differences.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to pop over to Mark then, because you've done that sort of digital and into the broadcasting world, and it's been a different intersection of how that storytelling is taking place. Oops, you're on mute, Mark.
That's just the first time that's going to happen. Really, sorry about that. Definitely defer to Amanda, certainly a lot of her podcasting experience, because it's really, really deep. Mine is, I have some experience in podcasting. Actually, my first quote podcast that I think I hosted, it was at a campus, on a campus radio station in New Brunswick in 2009. And I actually just used I hate to say this, the campus radio station, I used their station as my studio. Already back then, even though we had a show on the university radio station, I already knew that the audience was moving online. I soon knew that I was going to be capturing most of the audience for that show that we aired, live on a campus radio station online. And personally, I probably share this with others on the panel, Amanda and Amy, but my biggest passion right now is podcasting as a listener. It's actually where I consume most of my media, I'd say 90% of the time I spend as a consumer is with podcasting. You know, I admit that, being a radio person and a digital writing person. So for me, a lot of the last few years has been about trying to find, and again, I'd love to get Amanda's thoughts on this, you know, finding the business opportunity, because I know for a lot of you coming out of school now, moving into your, you know, your first jobs, your second jobs, your third jobs, you're going to find the business landscape is changing enormously, and it will dictate how podcasting evolves. As podcasting tries to find its place, there's a lot of really successful financial, like podcasts financially, but there's a lot of them too that are really popular, but haven't found a way to pay for themselves yet. So as a journalist and somebody with a passion for podcasting, I'm curious to see how that plays out. For me, and I think I'm just saying the same thing Amanda said. For me, storytelling at the heart is and exploring important issues in our communities is at the heart of everything we do, whether we work for a newspaper, report for a radio station, or produce a podcast. So to Amanda's point, it's all about finding the best place to tell a story and the best place to engage an audience. And I think that really does vary according to the medium and who you're trying to reach. So, but I'm one of these people, to your original question, who I just have a passion for storytelling and for the exploration of ideas and community issues. So that's why I'm just interested in all the mediums, because I reach audiences differently.
Yeah, and I think
whether I'm writing or whether I'm broadcasting.
Yeah, I think that is the great point of this panel, is there are so many different ways and places to be able to tell these stories and have just really good content, whether it's contained within a newscast or it's available on a website or it's in a longer form storytelling. All of that works. Welcome, Scott, to the panel. I'll be turning it over to you. I know I haven't gone to Amy yet with any questions to see if there's anything that she would like to. And Jeremy, we need to give a bit of an opportunity as well to talk a little bit about his role and some of the storytelling advice that he would have for our students. But please introduce yourself, Scott, and thank you for joining us.
Yes, sorry for my tardiness, everyone. I was having some internet issues. I've been working from home and occasionally having to deal with some outages, and of course one came along right as we were about to get started. So after a couple of reboots, everything's good, hopefully, for the next 30 minutes or so. So as Gina mentioned, my name is Scott Kitching. I'm the news manager for Blackburn Media for London, Windsor, and Chatham. My job also includes sort of being, I guess you could say, the editor of LondonNewsToday.ca, as well as CKNewsToday.ca and WindsorNews.ca. Yeah, let's go. Actually, enough about me. Let's go to one of our panelists. And Jeremy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your entrance into this business, because it came a little bit later.
Yes, it did. We have touched on that. It was a career change for me that, well, it made sense at the time, coming from a background running kitchens into well, radio. What I would love to touch on is just regarding the podcasting, which we've been chatting about. The thing and the blurred line, if you will, between radio and podcasting. In my role, serving as technical producer for the current events talk show Fight Back with Libby Znaimer, it is live on air from noon to 1 every weekday, but within half an hour to 35 minutes afterwards, it is up and ready to be accessed as a podcast. Our demographic for our stations is 45 and everything above. And something that I do, part of my role, is fielding emails and from listeners. And something that happens almost every week is a dedicated listener who missed an episode where they were talking about, for instance, you had a doctor on talking about new cancer research and I missed it. How can I get such great pleasure in being able to send this email reply with the link to the podcast saying, here's what you missed. enjoy it. And to me, the power that we have with that to be just speaking to intimacy of radio, which we can now extrapolate with the podcasting, it's no end of opportunities, and I love it.
Sorry, Jeannie, you had said you wanted to go to Amy, correct?
Well, I think that Amy has some questions prepared on behalf of students that we could go to. Well, we just get settled and look through the Q&A, which is hopping. We're trying to sort through some of the things that have been asked or not. So Amy, why don't you fire a question at the panel that is on your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I got a ton here, and I saw a lot of them repeated in the question or the Q&A section already, but one that was pretty big from our students and one that I see popping up here in the Q&A, talking about podcasting, but really the topic and how to know or how to choose a good topic for a podcast episode and how to know when it's niche enough, but not too niche. So I would love to go to any one of you who have maybe using from your own experiences about how you find topics and what to cover for your podcast.
Amanda, would you like to take this one first?
Sure. Yeah, it's a bit of a loaded question because it really does depend. So I think, and I saw that in the chat too, how niche is too niche. So I'm going to start there. I think podcasts are amazing because they're global. Here's another difference between radio and podcasting. Podcasts, you're getting downloads from all around the world. And yes, you could stream a radio station and from anywhere too, but you're actually appearing on charts and coming up. And you'll find that even people in Australia, half of the podcasts they listen to are American podcasts. And same with Canada. Half of the podcasts we listen to are American podcasts. And that wouldn't necessarily be the same for radio. I wouldn't say half of Canadian radio listeners are listening to American radio stations, right? So it does skew to a more global audience, which is great because you have all this access. But then it misses out on those beautiful niche stories. I think a lot of times when people are making a podcast, they're thinking, wow, this could be listened anywhere. So let me try to make it as broad as possible so I can bring in all English speaking people potentially, which is wonderful. But then that's where you start butting up against the millions and millions of other podcasts that are out there. And then it's really hard to stand out. And so what I've been recommending to my students and fellow peers who have been wanting to create a new podcast or niche down, in Canada, we see that the research shows that Canadian listeners want more Canadian content. And right now, there's only a handful of places they can really go to. So if you are on your own and there's tons of independent podcasters in the United States, and in Canada, I think it's been a bit tougher for some of our independent producers to really break through. And so what I would say is if you are an independent who is wanting to make your own podcast, and you're wanting to hopefully, make an impact on the charts, I would say even just like thinking as niche as Canada. So if you want to do a podcast about, I don't know, internet and gaming, what about internet and gaming in Canada? And what does that look like? And just putting that sort of a niche, you can get even more niche. I listen to Gary Vee from time to time, although he's a bit boisterous, he does have some really innovative ideas. And one of his notes in the podcast space is to talk about business and even business in a hyper local sense. What does business look like in Toronto? What does business look like in Halifax? And creating a podcast that's niche to a city or a region and interviewing the change makers in that area. It still does have appeal broad, other people in Canada might want to hear what's happening in Halifax business scene, right? So you can actually go from a geography perspective. Start there when you think about going niche. But as in general, when thinking about a topic, you just have to think about, like radio, this is where it's not different. You put yourself in your audience's shoes and you go, what matters to them? What do they want to hear about? And then depending on how often you publish or where you're publishing, if it's a daily podcast, your topic will change because it'll have to be something of the day. If it's more of an evergreen podcast, then you're going to be able to want to pick a topic that's going to have some life and breathe for more than a day or a week. And you'll have to think about that as you're thinking about the topic, but always putting yourself in your audience's shoes, whoever that audience is, whoever you think is listening or whoever you want to listen, and think what would matter to them and what do they want to hear about. And hopefully that will help you pick your topic.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this particular question, or shall we go on to the next one? Mark, Jeremy, either of you
I'll just offer a few thoughts, just based on what Amanda said. It really is, it's about figuring out who your audience is, and then even the even tougher part, thinking about how to reach them, right? Like that's one of the biggest challenges, because for a lot of people, even the younger demographics, it can be hard to reach. You can create the podcast, but it can be hard to reach them. But to Amanda's point around finding your audience, like I just know for us, with Huddle, we've created two business podcasts, right? And one of them I actually create and host, and it's around interviewing creators and entrepreneurs in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. And I have to say it's the hardest part, and that's why I bring it back to a lot of this to audience. The hardest part is actually reaching them and figuring out how to attract new listeners, because when we podcast now is a very entrepreneurial enterprise, right? It's not, even if you were in an established radio business or newspaper business, it's very entrepreneurial in terms of building programming and then finding the audience for that programming. And for some older, I know Amanda's run her own company, so she knows this the hard one way. It can be hard for big companies and established companies to think about building new products, and podcasts are presenting a real challenge for media outlets around North America. But for you, also thinking about your first jobs, coming out of school, you'll bring a lot of experience and perspective into workplaces on how to do this right. And in a lot of ways, we'll probably have a lot of opportunity if you think carefully about the kinds of podcasts you want to create and where you would find your audiences. You'll actually find opportunity in media outlets, I think, to be part of building up podcasting as part of a business, whether it's a small business or a large business. I know we're going through those conversations inside Acadia right now, and we are looking to a lot of the younger people in the company to bring that perspective and experience, to their jobs.
Mm-hmm. I want to go to a question. This is from Bianca Tassie Ann. And Mark, I'd like to stay with you for this question. And I think I may, when you're finished, offer a little bit of input as well. But the question is, as a beginner in news reporting, what do employers look for in a person with no industry experience? So if you get a resume and a cover letter and a demo from someone who is perhaps just a recent grad, has not worked in the industry as yet, what, if anything, in that resume and demo are you looking for, Mark, in terms of, this is someone I could consider hiring even though they have no experience? Is there any kind of quality that you might see that would kind of make you think, yes, this is someone I'll take a chance on?
Yeah, can I answer that question with a personal story?
Of course, please do.
I think I told this story to you guys when I was in a call last week, because it's a great question. My first job was as a newspaper reporter in Halifax, and it was a sports reporter, and that was in 1992, 91, and I actually I had a liberal arts degree, and I was working in a garden center of all places in Halifax with an English degree. And I had just come back from traveling overseas. I'd been in India for 6 months, and I saw a little ad in a newspaper, in the Daily News, which is a newspaper that no longer exists in Halifax. And it was a little ad in the classifieds that was advertising for a sports reporter. And I was like, I'd love to write. I love sports. Hadn't set foot in a journalism school. Applied for this job, and I would have been 23 at the time, I'm going to say. And I got an interview, and I got on a short list of 2 candidates. I talked my way to the top of the list with, how committed I was to doing well in this job, how passionate I was about writing, how passionate I was about sports, how open I was to learning. And I finished second in this contest for this job. And I got a phone call late at night from the sports editor, and to tell me that I had a great interview, but they'd chosen somebody else over me. And I spent a few minutes on the phone with the sports editor at the time saying, thanks for the opportunity, really wanted this opportunity, understand that you found somebody that you thought was more suited than me. If he doesn't work out, give me a call. And I hung up the phone, was disappointed, went out for a drink in downtown Halifax, came back a few hours later, and there was a message on my phone, and it was the sports editor. I called him back, and because of our phone call, he actually never called the winning candidate. He changed his mind based on our phone call, and he offered me the job. No experience. I talked my way in. But for me, it's a long answer to your question, Scott. What I learned from that is my passion and my commitment to learning and really wanting the job. Like I can't put it any other way. And confidently saying I could do it and learn it was enough to get my foot in the door. And I'll end this answer by saying a few years later, what I learned from that experience, a few years later, I actually started my own newspaper and built my own team. And we actually hired a lot of people that didn't have journalism degrees. And what you'll hear a lot now is the journalism degrees are really important. The broadcast degrees are important, but a lot of companies now are hiring for fit, right? They want to know that you have a passion for the work. They want to know that you'll be, a positive addition to the culture of whatever organization or media let you join. And they want to know that you're willing to grow and learn. And those things, Scott, are really, and that's true whether you're a 22-year-old coming out of school or you're a 50-year-old looking for a new opportunity. It's that passion and commitment to your community, to the work, it goes just as far, and your work ethic goes just as far as a piece of paper that you're submitting, with a list of the places you worked on it, right? I don't know. So that answers that question?
Yeah, I think so. And those are all excellent points. I think what it comes down to, I think, in a lot of ways is tenacity. Showing that you are interested in the job and that you will do, you will be tenacious in trying to get that job. I think for me, as someone who has in the past hired people right out of school, the biggest thing I look for, a couple of things really, and a lot of them are things that you touched on, Mark, that real expression of willingness and desire to get the job. If you are tenacious in pursuing the job, that tells me as a hiring person when you're doing the job. So that's something that I look for. I also look for, when I'm looking at that resume and I'm looking at that cover letter, I'm thinking to myself, can this person write? Because that's, there was a time that I'm sure, Mark, you remember as well, and, where in radio, it didn't necessarily matter if you were, a quote unquote strong print writer, because you weren't writing for print, you were writing for on air. Those days, of course, are gone. Now people who are coming into work in newsrooms and radio stations are also having to write for the web. So you are having to write for on air. You're also having to write what is essentially a print story. So one of the things I'm looking for is, can this person write? Can they construct a good paragraph? Can they, do they have a handle on what are kind of the rules of writing when it comes to grammar and so forth? But ultimately what I'm really looking for, and this is, I think, in some ways something you can't teach. So it's not so much a question of whether or not you are experienced. What I'm looking for is critical thinkers, people who are going to, maybe they get a news release from their local MP, and maybe 4 out of 10 people who would get that release would essentially just write it up, and there you go. Here's some content. No, what I'm looking for is someone who's going to look at that release and immediately say, okay, I've got a lot of questions about this. And so I need to get in touch with this MP. I need to grill them about some of these things. I need to get some of the background information on this. So it's really about, for me, it's less about how much experience you have. It's more about what I see your future possibly being, and what talents you have, what skills you have in being a journalist and being that kind of critical thinker who's not just going to, regurgitate press releases. I want people who are eager to dig up stories. And sometimes you might have two applicants for the same job. One of them's got 5 years of experience, but it's 5 years of just, just kind of regurgitating press releases. And this other person who's coming right out of school, but in their second year at school, they broke, a really important story. So what I'm looking for is, as someone who is, potentially hiring someone without much experience, is those kinds of critical thinking skills. So I hope that answers your question, Bianca. So what I would suggest is, when you do start your job search, be really careful about how you write your cover letter. Make sure that it's grammatically correct and all your punctuation's right, because that tells me, that you know how to write. And then in the interview process, certainly make me believe that you're a critical thinker, because then, you're going to really improve your chances of getting the job and probably have a better shot at having a good career. Jeremy, Amanda, either of you want to weigh in on Bianca's question before we go on to the next one?
I'll just quickly say, from a podcast and radio perspective, I think it's important to have made a podcast. And so I want to hear something, and that can just be a trailer or a sample of what you made. And same with radio. If you want to get into radio, I think having a demo, even if it's something you did at school or something that you did just on your own, I think having some work to show what you can do is really important. And also, if you've made a podcast episode that's like 1 hour long, do not expect your potential employer to listen to the whole thing. Segment out the best 2 minutes and send that as part of your demo. I think that's a good way to stand out from the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy, I've got a question that I think is certainly one that you can answer. And this one comes from Brittany from Fanshawe. Brittany wants to know, is traditional talk radio getting harder to get into modern day, so today? And what are the chances of someone new getting a gig, for example, at the CBC? But I think, Jeremy, you're probably pretty well positioned to answer the first part of that question. Is it getting harder to get gigs in talk radio today versus, say 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Well, to be honest, I couldn't speak to 10 or 15 years ago, but I'm that new. But I will say, I really don't think it's harder. It's just different. I'm sure everyone here could attest to the fact that you will hear, especially in school, you need to be prepared to go far and wide for your first gig, and that's true. That's very true. It's very common. My crew, the people that I was in Humber with, first jobs out of the gate, we've got people in Yellowknife, we've got people in northern British Columbia, and out east in the far corners there too. I think the opportunities that anyone that's listening to this now, the programs they're in, every school, I believe, has taken care to make sure that there's a versatility for students now, where years back there might have been a bit of a silo, if you will, maybe with a little bit of crossover, but now pretty much every school will teach you the multiple skills that are not just nice to have, but absolutely necessary out of the gate to be able to get that first gig. My case in point, again, my first gig at Global News Radio 640 Toronto, I was hired as a part-time board op, but I had the background and training from school to be able to say, oh, you need a weekend news anchor, I can do that too. And it's social media, the ability to say, sure, I'll handle your posts. Of course I can do that, because it's so now interconnected. As far as I'm concerned, anyone listening to this has an infinite amount of opportunities. They just need to be able to maybe not put so much of a concern as to that first opportunity, because this industry, more than most, the next opportunity is going to come lightning fast.
Interesting. You mentioned flexibility and skill set. how you went from being a board op and then into a weekend news anchor. You also do some producing for the talk shows during the week. That tells me that you do possess a very varied skill set. And I wonder if you could talk, and we'll get Amanda and Mark to weigh in on this as well, about the importance of having that multitude of skills. I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, I'm a really good newscaster, I can write really well for radio, but that's one element of the job. How crucial is it, to have that varied skill set in today's media market?
For my money, it's quintessential. There's one thing I would love to say, because I have this opportunity, I'm going to take it. No matter what discipline our listeners are studying right now, you would serve yourself well. If it's not part of your program, figure out some other way to get your hands on the knowledge. Production, study a little bit of production, even cursory. But in this day and age, especially if you have any interest in podcasts, you're going to want to know the production anyways. But it's one area that there is so much opportunity. Everyone needs good producers, and just to even be able to say, sure, I can take your audition software and make this work. Sure, I can take this Audacity and make that work. There's no end of different methods. Production is key for you to be able to say, let me at it. I got this. It's helpful. Does that help?
Oh, it looks like Scott may be frozen.
Oh.
We are winding down on time here with the next panel, just in the wings. Amy, is there any quick question, or did we get most of the questions answered? And then maybe we'll go around and just see if there's any quick final takeaway for anyone who's just trying to get their foot in the door and get that gig as a content producer or journalist.
Yeah, exactly. All of the questions that I have really been answered by you guys today, which is amazing. And yeah, my final question is going right from what Gina said, is really just those who are looking to get a gig. What advice would you guys have for those who are interested in the news talk and podcasting industry?
I can kick us off. And sorry, I have a restless dog here with me. So Simi is going to be part of this. All right. So bringing a cute dog to your interview might help. No, don't do that. What I was going to say is make some stuff, have gotten your hands dirty, and hopefully you have some things from school, but also on your own. But also listen to what the station you're applying for is doing. Listen to the competitors, like spend time listening, even if it's not the kind of stuff you want to make, knowing what the competitor is. And, we talked about some of these struggles with monetization and podcasting. And I know there was I was trying to answer as much as I could in the chat, but we're looking to you for ideas to help solve some of these problems and help define this new era of audio. You are the ones who are coming in and going to be able to breathe fresh life into some of the problems that we've had for so long, right? So the better you can understand the industry and that what's going on now, and having had a chance to get your hands dirty in it yourself, when you go into that interview, you can talk about and bring some ideas to the table, and just to show that you're thinking and that you know what they've already done, and maybe you listen to something else and you're thinking of putting the ideas together, that kind of thinking. Mark talked about the ability to be a critical thinker. Like that's in a way a critical thinking about the industry. And so having people who are taking that approach to speaking about their work and the work that they hope to do will really help you stand out from the crowd.
Quickly for me, I just want to go back to quickly to a previous question about getting into talk radio and finding opportunities there. I can't speak for obviously the folks from the private broadcasters around the table here and the opportunities that in their workplaces. But I do know one tip for you, if you haven't caught on to it already, is if you're interested, and I know this from my CBC radio days, which the last time I was at CBC was in 2015, is that across the country in the larger and smaller centers, there's a great need in most of the communities for what's called a casual. And a lot of people break into, for example, the CBC radio network they might live in St. John, New Brunswick, which is where I live. I happen to live. And so we have a CBC affiliate here. And there's always one or two people in those stations that are casual employees, but are getting like 30 and 40 hours of work a week. I've been that person before. So a piece of advice, but this could be true of different private broadcasters as well, not just a public one, is really looking for those creative entrepreneurial opportunities to get your foot in the door. And I know a lot of young people that I worked with over the years at CBC Radio, that was one of the ways they got in the door. And I'm sure that with the private broadcasters, there are similar opportunities. We have somebody in St. John who's still at St. Thomas University in Fredericton here that has worked with us throughout the winter as a casual, much like a CBC person. And I think the only other thing I would say is, I'm not sure if I'm using a really old expression here, but we, inside my workplace, we have a couple of Swiss Army knives. And what I mean by that, if that's an old expression, is that we have people that know how to do a lot of things, and they're willing and ready to do anything. Like they just contribute in so many different ways, from writing web stories to reading the news to going out and doing, news stories, and they're active on social media. So they have lots of strengths to bring to bear on how stories are shared in social media. And I know that didn't come up in this session, but I think it came up in the one before this one, that being an active sharer of your stories and knowing how important social media is to the process now of sharing media stories is really critical. And the younger employees know that better than the veteran ones. So just to Jeremy's point, being flexible, it doesn't mean that you'll be the Swiss Army knife. But if you're somebody who's really good on the air, and they also know that you're also a really good web writer, and you're also great on social media, and you can snap a quick video at a news conference, it doesn't mean that you'll always do all of those things, but having the confidence and ability to do all of those things, and if not being an expert at all of them, just be preparing to learn and work at it is so critically important. So I think that's what I would have to add.
Great, thanks. I think that's a good note to end on, and these sessions go way too fast, and the conversations will hopefully continue afterwards. So thank you so much to each of you. Thank you to Scott, who tried to push through those technical challenges. And we're going to move now into our sales promotions and marketing panel. Thanks, everyone.